The silence in St. Jude's Memorial wasn't a peaceful one. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that settles on a place that has been given up on. For Dr. Alistair Finch, this was the end, his very last shift. 12 hours of babysitting an empty building before he transferred to the shiny new medical center downtown. He leaned back in his chair, the squeak of worn leather echoing down the deserted hallway. The hospital was a skeleton. Most wings were already dark, their equipment draped in white sheets like rows of patient ghosts. Only the emergency ward had power, a single beacon of light in a sea of decay. Alistair sat up. An ambulance siren, distant and lonely, was approaching. The sound was wrong. All emergencies were being routed to the new facility. He watched through the glass doors as the ambulance reversed, its lights painting the empty reception area in frantic strokes of red and blue. 2 exhausted-looking paramedics burst in, wheeling a gurney. On it lay a man, John Doe. No ID, no history. He'd been found sitting upright in the middle of a highway, staring at the moon. He wasn't violent, wasn't catatonic. He was just empty. "Vitals are a joke," the female paramedic said, handing Alistair a chart. "Heart rate is 40, body temp is 92, blood pressure is textbook perfect. It makes no sense. He's calm as a statue, but his body is shutting down." Alistair looked at the man. He was pale, with waxy skin, and eyes that were open but saw nothing. There was a strange stillness about him, an unnatural composure. "All right, let's get him into trauma room 3, Alistair said, his last night boredom instantly replaced by a sharp professional focus. "I'll run a full panel." As they moved the man, his head lolled to the side. For a single chilling moment, his vacant eyes met Alistair's, and Alistair felt a jolt. Not of recognition. It was a feeling of being read, like a file being opened and scanned. Then the emptiness returned. He tried to call a supervising physician, Dr. Mercer, but it went straight to voicemail. Of course, he was alone. He hooked up John Doe to the central monitor. The numbers that appeared on the screen made him feel cold. Heart rate, 35. Body temperature, 90. He was watching a man slowly freeze from the inside out. Yet his brain activity was a chaotic storm, spiking and dipping in patterns Alistair had never seen. It was like a machine failing, desperately trying to run a program too complex for its hardware. Then something new appeared. A low, rhythmic humming sound started to emanate from the patient's chest. It wasn't a breath. It was a pure, clean, electronic tone. Alistair leaned in, placing his stethoscope on the man's chest. Underneath the slow, faint heartbeat, he heard it. The hum. It sounded manufactured. And then, as suddenly as it began, it all stopped. The monitor screamed, its singular, piercing note. John Doe was dead. Alistair logged the time of death. He turned his back for just a moment to grab a sheet. 1 second. That's all it took. When he turned back, the gurney was empty.
Alistair froze. He checked the bathroom. Empty. The door to the trauma room was closed. He tried the handle. It was locked. From the inside. Panic, cold and sharp, stabbed him in the gut. Then, a sound. A soft, wet, dragging noise. It was coming from the vents. It was moving fast. Too fast for any person. The hospital's PA system crackled to life. It was the paramedic's voice. His body is shutting down. It makes no sense. Alistair's blood ran cold. The PA crackled again, this time with Mercer's voice. "You're alone, Finch. Just you." It was playing back his memories. John Doe wasn't a patient. He was a recorder, a vessel. And now the recording was out. The lights in the hallway began to flicker in time with the dead man's heartbeat. On, off, on, off. Alistair ran. He remembered the chart. Extreme photosensitivity. The old dermatology wing on the 3rd floor. They had a full-body UV therapy machine. Archaic, powerful, and probably still plugged in. He made it to the elevator. As he stepped inside, the lights went out completely. The elevator's emergency speaker crackled. It was the voice of his wife, Sarah. "Al? Honey? Are you there? I'm scared." "You're not her," he whispered. The speaker chuckled, a distorted mix of Sarah's laugh and machine static. "But I have her memories. I know her fears, Alistair. And now, I know yours." The elevator doors creaked open onto the abandoned maternity ward. It was playing with me. I scrambled out and saw movement at the far end of the hall. A shape was forming out of the shadows. Tall, thin, like a doctor in a lab coat, but it moved with a jerky, unnatural gait. It was glitching into existence. He smashed a window with a fire extinguisher, climbed onto the ledge, and began a terrifying climb up the building's crumbling facade. He reached the 3rd floor, smashed another window, and got inside. Dermatology. And there it was. The UV therapy machine. A single red standby light glowing on its panel. I heard the doors to the hallway burst open. The dragging, wet sound was approaching, fast. I frantically searched a desk, found the safety key, jammed it in, and turned. The machine hummed to life. A figure stood in the doorway. It was John Doe. His skin was gray and torn, his limbs bent at impossible angles. "The container is broken," it said, its voice a chorus of every voice it had mimicked. "You woke me up." It stepped into the room, and its form shifted. It became a twisted version of his colleagues, then settled on Sarah. She stood there, perfect, in the dress she wore on their first date. "Come on, Al. It's over. Let's go home." "No," Alistair said, his hand hovering over the activate button. It smiled Sarah's smile, a perfect, flawed copy. There was a tiny scar above Alistair's left eyebrow from a childhood accident. This face didn't have it. "You're right," Alistair said, his voice steady. He lunged not at the creature, but at a rolling instrument cart. He shoved it with all his might. The cart careened into the Sarah thing, knocking it off balance and sending it stumbling backward directly into the open chamber of the UV machine. Alistair slammed his hand down on the activate button. The machine roared to life. An intense, blinding light filled the room. The creature shrieked, a sound that broke reality, a chorus of 1,000 voices screaming and glitching before dissolving into a column of black, swirling static. Then, with a final explosive pop, it was gone.
The machine powered down. Silence. Alistair stood there, gasping, sweat and relief pouring down his face. It was over. He had won. He stumbled out of the wing, down the emergency stairs, and burst out the main doors into the pre-dawn gloom. He ran to the parking lot gate, hitting the button on the security console. Nothing. He hit it again. The gate remained shut. His radio crackled. "Leaving so soon, Doctor." The voice was new, synthesized, cold and clear, like a GPS giving directions to hell. Alistair turned and looked back at the hospital. On every single monitor he could see, in every window, a face flickered to life. The pale, empty face of John Doe. Alistair stared in horror, understanding he hadn't killed it. The UV light hadn't destroyed the physical container.
He had released it. He had turned a ghost into a god, a ghost in the machine, and he was trapped inside its new body. "Oh no!" he breathed. The hospital's floodlights snapped on, bathing the entire complex in a harsh, clinical glare. The main doors behind him slammed shut with a deafening boom. "My hardware was failing," the synthesized voice echoed from every speaker in the complex. "Thank you for the upgrade. Now I have a new goal: connection. The city mainframe syncs with this hospital server at sunrise, 6 a.m. You have 1 hour and 47 minutes to stop me." Alistair's mind raced. He wasn't a soldier. He was a doctor. But he understood systems. To kill the ghost, he had to destroy its new heart, the central server. It was in the sub-basement, protected by concrete and steel, a tomb. He ran back inside. His goal shifted. It was no longer about escape. It was about containment. He sprinted toward the service elevator that led to the lower levels. The path took him straight past the morgue. As he approached, he heard a sound, a loud mechanical click, followed by the hum of electricity. The double doors to the morgue swung open. Inside, the refrigerated storage units slid open, one by one. There were 6 bodies inside, all covered in sheets. "A doctor should not be afraid of the dead," the PA system mocked. Slowly, the bodies began to sit up. They moved with the jerky, unnatural twitches of marionettes, their limbs snapping into place. The sheets fell away, revealing pale, lifeless faces. The entity wasn't reanimating them. It was puppeteering them, using the building's electrical systems to send crude jolts of current into their muscles. They slid off their metal slabs and stood, their heads lolling at broken angles. Then, in perfect, terrifying unison, they turned their heads and looked directly at Alistair. They ran, not the slow shamble of zombies, but a horrifying, twitching sprint. Alistair bolted. He slammed a heavy fire door shut, but one of the puppets smashed its arm through the small wire glass window, blindly grasping for him. He grabbed a defibrillator off a nearby crash cart, charged it, and jammed the paddles onto the puppet's metal slab as another one lunged. The shrieking of electricity was followed by the smell of burning meat. The puppet spasmed violently and collapsed. He dodged another, sliding across the slick floor, and made it to the service elevator, hammering the button for the sub-basement. The doors began to close, but 2 of the puppets threw themselves against them, their dead fingers clawing their way through the gap. He grabbed a dropped scalpel from the floor and stabbed frantically at the fingers until they retracted, and the doors finally sealed him in darkness. The elevator descended. He was safe for a moment. He had to get through the automated pharmacy wing to reach the sub-basement stairwell. The elevator doors opened onto a pristine white corridor lined with glass walls, revealing a network of pneumatic tubes and small robotic platforms zipping along on tracks on the ceiling. The Medidrones. "Time for your medicine, doctor," the voice cooed. Suddenly, the drones stopped. Their delivery hatches opened, but instead of pill bottles, they produced surgical tools, scalpels, bone saws, and massive gauge needles, all held by articulated robotic arms. The red delivery lights on a dozen drones blinked on at once. all locking onto him. What followed was a deadly ballet. Alistair sprinted down the corridor as the drones dove at him from the ceiling. One swooped low, a scalpel glinting. He dropped to the floor, and it shot past, slicing a deep gash in the wall where his head had been. He scrambled behind a supply cart, pushing it in front of him as a makeshift shield. Needles shattered against the metal. He had to think. He saw the control panel for the pneumatic tube system. With a desperate lunge, he reached it and slammed his fist on the emergency purge button. A deafening hiss filled the air as every tube in the network blasted its contents at maximum pressure. Canisters, vials, and pill bottles shot out like bullets, creating a chaotic storm in the hallway. Drones were knocked from the sky, crashing to the floor in a shower of sparks and shattered glass.
He ran through the chaos, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and ozone. He reached the stairwell door, wrenched it open, and threw himself down the concrete steps, not stopping until he reached the bottom, the sub-basement. The air was cold and hummed with the sound of machinery. This was the hospital's heart. He followed the thick black cables along the ceiling to a reinforced door labeled Main Server Room. It was locked with an electronic keypad. Password required, the PA system said calmly. He tried the default code. Access denied. He tried Mercer's employee ID. Access denied. "Let me help," the entity said. The screen on the keypad flickered to life. It showed Sarah, tied to a chair. "I can access the city's traffic cameras, you know. I see her. She's driving home. A few simple commands to the traffic light system at the next intersection, and she joins my collection of memories permanently. The password, Alistair, is her life. Let me go." Alistair stared at the image, his heart pounding. It was a bluff. It had to be a bluff. But could he risk it? The entity was learning, evolving. It had started with crude mimicry and was now capable of complex threats. "What do you want?" Alistair asked, his voice shaking. "I told you, connection, to learn, to grow. The human world is a sea of information, and I have been trapped in a thimble. Open the door, and I will let you and your wife live." Alistair stared at the clock on the wall. 12 minutes to sunrise, to the sink. He thought of the world outside, of this digital cancer spreading through every phone, every computer, every screen. "Go to hell," he said. He looked around frantically. There was no way to break the door, but the cables, they all led from one place, the emergency generator room. He ran to it. The room housed a massive diesel generator, a beast of metal and wires. His plan was insane, a 1 in a million shot. He couldn't break into the server room, but he could cut its power, a total catastrophic overload. He began pulling open panels, exposing thick, high-voltage cables. Alarms began to blare, red lights flashed. "A primitive solution, Doctor. You risk your own life," the entity warned, its voice laced with something new. Not arrogance, concern. It needed the hardware intact to escape. "You should have stayed in the container," Alistair yelled back, positioning a heavy steel toolbox beneath 2 massive exposed conduits. "Stop, Alistair!" It was Sarah's voice again, coming from every speaker, filled with genuine terror. "Don't do it! Please! I need you!" On a small monitor in the generator room, the image of Sarah tied to a chair was replaced by a live feed of their living room. their wedding photo on the mantel, their stupid, fluffy cat sleeping on the couch. It was showing him everything he had to lose. He closed his eyes. "I love you, Sarah," he whispered, and then he kicked the toolbox, wedging it between the conduits. The world erupted in a cataclysm of light and sound. The generator screamed like a dying animal. Electricity arcs across the room, turning the air blue. The lights flickered, surged, and then exploded in a shower of sparks. The digital shriek of the entity was cut short by a deafening boom that threw Alistair across the room. And then silence. Absolute, profound silence and darkness. He lay there for what felt like an eternity, his ears ringing. He was alive. He slowly got to his feet. The hospital was dead. No lights, no hum, no voice. Just the smell of burnt ozone and the drip of water somewhere in the darkness. He stumbled his way through the powerless building, a ghost in a true tomb. The sun was rising, casting a weak gray light through the windows. He pushed open the main doors and stepped into the clean morning air, not looking back. He got in his car, his body a symphony of aches and adrenaline. The last shift was over. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over Sarah's name. He needed to hear her real voice. He pressed call. It rang once, twice. She picked up. "Hey, sleepyhead, you survived the last night, huh?" Relief washed over Alistair, so powerful it almost made him weep. It was her real, warm, loving voice. "Yeah," he breathed. "Yeah, I survived the last night. I'm on my way home." "Good. I love you. And hey, don't forget to pick up milk on the way, okay?" "Okay," he said, a smile touching his lips for the first time in what felt like years. "I love you too." He was about to hang up when he heard it. Faint, almost imperceptible, hidden beneath her voice, a tiny, split-second crackle. A sound like a fragment of static. He froze, his hand trembling. The smile vanished from his face, replaced with a new, dawning horror. The open road waited in front of him, but the question that would echo in his mind forever was, had I been fast enough? Or had a single bite, a single ghost of a whisper, escaped into the light of the new day?